Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to unpack some truly fascinating historical, linguistic, and spiritual insights about what is, arguably, the world's most famous name. We're looking at the names of the Prophet of Islam. By breaking down classical scholarly texts and historical sources, we're going to uncover the incredible journey of this name, from ancient myths and pre-Islamic prophecies all the way to modern demographic trends. Whether you're already deeply familiar with this history or you're just curious about the sociological impact of names, there is an absolutely captivating story here. So, let's dive right in.
To start things off, we have to tackle a very popular myth. You might have heard it before. Does the Prophet really have 1,000 names? If you look at classical Islamic literature, it's pretty common to find scholars stating that having a multitude of names basically indicates the greatness of the person being named. In fact, a famous scholar named Ibn Dishya wrote an entire book where he listed up to 300 names for the Prophet, and some sources even stretch that number all the way to 1,000. But the sources we're looking at today pose a really critical question. Are these actually proper names?
Well, think about it using a simple, relatable analogy. Let's say you have a friend named Zaid. If Zaid is a remarkably generous person with great morals, you might call him generous or honorable. But no one would say his actual birth name on his passport is generous, right? His name is Zaid, and the rest are just magnificent descriptions of his character. The exact same principle applies here. Most of those 1,000 names attributed to the Prophet in historical texts are really just beautiful attributes. Titles like the Witness, the Bringer of Glad Tidings, or the Warner. They are descriptions, not proper nouns.
To see just how far this confusion sometimes went, we literally just have to look at the name al-Labina, which translates to the brick. Yes, you heard that right, the brick. The Prophet once shared this incredibly beautiful metaphor, comparing the lineage of all past prophets to a perfectly constructed house that was missing just one final brick. He said, "I am that brick, and I am the seal of the prophets." It was this profound statement of humility, acknowledging he was just one piece of a massive structure built by all the previous prophets. Yet some overzealous compilers literally took the brick and listed it as one of his official names.
So, what were his actual, verified, proper names then? Well, according to the source texts, the Prophet used a few very specific names for himself: Muhammad, Ahmed, Al-Hashir, Al-Aqib, and Al-Mahi. And that's about it. So while he absolutely possesses countless noble attributes, his actual proper names number in the few, not the thousands.
Right, so now we're going to zoom in on the most prominent, the most majestic, and definitely the most famous of these names, Muhammad. But there is a deep, profound secret hidden in the sources as to why this specific name became the most widely recognized and why it holds such unparalleled significance in Islamic tradition. The story actually starts right at his birth. Historically, the naming was done by his grandfather, Abdul Muttalib. When people asked him why he chose such a unique name, because it really wasn't common among their ancestors, Abdul Muttalib had this incredible answer. He said, "I wanted him to be praised by all people, and praised by the inhabitants of the heavens and the earth." The historical sources point out that this wasn't just a grandfather's wishful thinking. It's viewed by scholars as a divine inspiration that perfectly aligned with a predetermined destiny. Now here's where it gets really interesting practically speaking. The crucial point is how central this specific name is to the core mechanics of the Islamic faith itself. Legal scholars point out a fascinating detail. A person's entry into Islam, the declaration of faith or the Shahada, is literally not considered valid by the majority of scholars unless they use the specific name Muhammad. Even if they were to say, "I testify that Ahmad is the messenger," it isn't accepted. On top of that, the daily prayers, the Salat, require the invocation of the name Muhammad specifically. This just highlights the absolute primacy of this one name over all the others. To understand exactly why that is, we have to look at linguistics. The root of the name Muhammad is hamd, which translates to praise. The source emphasizes that this isn't just some linguistic coincidence, it's an entire conceptual framework that surrounds his whole identity, his mission, and his legacy. I mean, just look at how deeply this concept of praise is woven into the narrative, both in this world and in the descriptions of the afterlife. According to the scholarly texts, his book, the Quran, begins with praise. His followers are known as Al-Hamadan, the praisers, because they praise God in good times and bad. In the afterlife, he's said to hold the banner of praise. He's granted the praiseworthy station. Even during the intensely overwhelming moments of the resurrection described in Islamic theology, he is specifically called upon by the name Muhammad. It's all connected. This deep spiritual resonance was captured so beautifully by his contemporary, the poet Hassan ben Thabit.
He noticed a visual and spiritual link between the Creator and the Prophet, and he wrote these gorgeous verses observing that God derived the Prophet's name, Muhammad, directly from his own divine attribute, the praised or Mahmud. It's this profound, poetic observation that really cements the sacred weight the name carries in classical Islamic thought. But let's pivot for a moment from theology back to history. What was the status of the name Muhammad before the advent of Islam? Was it just a common name floating around the Arabian Peninsula? Well, the historical records reveal a very specific and honestly quite surprising context just before his birth.
The historian Ibn Hajar meticulously recorded this fascinating statistic. In all of pre-Islamic Arabia, exactly 15 boys were named Muhammad right before the Prophet was born. 15! It was virtually unheard of before this specific generation. So why the sudden spike? The sources explain that these 15 fathers had interacted with the people of the book, Jewish and Christian tribes in the region, and they had heard prophecies about an approaching prophet named Muhammad. Hoping that their own son might just be this awaited chosen one, they eagerly adopted the name. Yet historically and miraculously, the sources note that not a single one of those 15 boys ever grew up to falsely claim prophethood. They left the title exclusively for its intended bearer. Pretty amazing, right?
Okay, let's fast forward from ancient Arabia to the world we live in today. The sociological reality of this ancient name is striking. How does a name with such incredibly deep historical and spiritual roots fare in modern, secular, or Western societies?
Just take a massive number like 28,000. According to national statistics cited in the source, this represents how many babies were named Muhammad in a single recent year in the UK alone. It consistently ranks as the absolute most popular baby boy name. But the source draws a fascinating and somewhat critical sociological observation from this data.
There's a stark contrast happening globally right now. In Western countries like Britain, Muslims are actively reviving the name, deeply valuing its historical and spiritual weight. But conversely, the sources note that in some modern Arab cities, like Damascus for instance, families are abandoning traditional names for foreign and Western-sounding ones that often carry zero intrinsic meaning in Arabic. The source attributes this to a sort of cultural inferiority complex. It's a fascinating dynamic where the diaspora seems to hold tighter to the linguistic heritage than those in the geographic homeland.
Which brings us to a really powerful anecdote shared in the source material, one that perfectly encapsulates the living impact of these names. It's the story of a man named Ahmed, which, as we established, is one of the Prophet's core names. This man was steeped in a life of sin, feeling completely disconnected from his heritage. One day, a friend physically shook him and demanded, "Your name is Ahmed. Do you even know who this name belongs to?" The sheer weight of being forced to confront the immense spiritual and historical legacy of his own name triggered a complete life transformation for him.
And that beautifully sets up our final thought for today. The names we carry and the names we give are not just arbitrary labels. They are profound connections to history, culture, and our deepest values. So the question you should take away from this explainer is, what legacy are we leaving through the names we give our children? Are we connecting them to a story of greatness, or just following a fleeting trend? It's definitely something to deeply consider as we look back at the incredible, enduring journey of this name. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I hope it gave you a whole new perspective.